Welcome, everyone, to a story you won't soon forget. Knowing your husband is sleeping with his mistress behind your back is one thing. But when I packed my bags and quietly walked away from my life, I made sure his discovery of my absence would be a symphony of destruction, played out note by painful note. 7 days after I left, my husband returned home to find our wedding ring and a divorce petition on the table. He immediately began to question the whole house in a panic. The housekeeper said, "Mrs. Sterling told me you'd be staying with your mistress this week. I thought you already knew." A moment later, his lawyer called with one sentence that made him collapse to the floor. The rain fell in relentless, gray sheets, drumming a monotonous rhythm against the panoramic windows of our 21st floor penthouse. It was a miserable New York night, the kind that mirrored the cold, empty space my heart had become. On that night, Ethan, my husband, came home. He entered with the familiar swagger of a king returning to his castle, a man who wrestled with Wall Street titans by day and expected serene worship by night. His white silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his Tom Ford tie pulled loose and askew. He looked every bit the part of the triumphant, high-powered executive. For the past 7 days, he'd told me he was flying to Miami to close a new tech deal. But he wasn't in Miami. He was enjoying a lavish, sun-soaked vacation at a secluded resort in the Florida Keys with Amber. I knew this because the private jet, the oceanfront villa, and the extravagant dinners were all charged to the supplementary black card I managed as part of my duties as his financially astute, stay-at-home wife. Ethan tossed his leather briefcase onto the sofa, the thud echoing in the cavernous silence. He sank into the cushions, rubbing his temples and calling out into the darkness. "Olivia, I'm home. Make me a whiskey sour, will you? My head is killing me." It was his old habit, the ingrained expectation that I would be there, waiting for him, no matter the hour. He was accustomed to finding a warm towel for his face and a stiff drink in his hand, a silent servant to his stressful life. But tonight, his only answer was a silence so profound it was almost a physical presence. The sprawling living room was pitch black. The warm, golden glow I usually kept on for his return was absent. The subtle, calming scent of the lavender and chamomile diffuser I always ran to combat the smell of stale cigars and whiskey on his clothes was gone. Ethan let out an exasperated sigh, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He reached over and flicked on the switch for the grand crystal chandelier. A cold, sterile white light flooded the room, illuminating a space that felt strangely, shockingly empty. That's when the first flicker of unease seemed to pierce through his fatigue and arrogance. Something was wrong. He pushed himself up and walked toward the kitchen, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Olivia, where the hell are you? Did you not hear me call?" Not a single reply, only the low, mechanical hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator in the dead quiet. Ethan's patience, always a finite resource, evaporated. He pulled out his iPhone, his thumb jabbing at my contact photo on his screen. Across town, in my small, anonymous rental, my phone vibrated violently on the nightstand, the screen glowing with the words, "My husband," a label I hadn't yet found the strength to change. I watched it buzz, then go dark, a bitter smile touching my lips. When he couldn't reach me, he did what he always did. He found someone else to blame, someone lower on the food chain. He bellowed up the grand staircase. "Maria! Maria, where are you? Get down here, now!" A few moments later, our housekeeper, Maria, hurried out from her small room on the ground floor. She was a woman in her late 60s, her face a roadmap of a hard life, still dressed in her simple, worn-out houseclothes. Her expression was a mixture of sleepiness, confusion, and a deep, ingrained fear of my husband's temper. She stood before him, nervously wringing the hem of her apron. "Yes, Mr. Sterling? You called for me?" Ethan glared at her, his voice dripping with ice. "Where is my wife? It's the middle of the night. This house is like a morgue, and she's not answering her phone. Where did she go?" Maria hesitated for a second, her eyes darting around the room as if trying to recall the precise instructions I had given her before I walked out the door. She glanced at Ethan, then answered in the plain, honest tone of a woman who didn't know how to lie. "Sir, Mrs. Sterling, she's been gone all week." Ethan froze, his face a mask of disbelief. His eyebrows shot up. "Gone? Gone where? Why didn't anyone tell me? Maria bowed her head, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but every word was perfectly clear, each one a slap across my husband's arrogant face. Sir, the day she left, she told me you were on a very important business trip and that I was not to disturb you. She paused, taking a shallow breath before delivering the final devastating blow. And she said that this week you would be sleeping at Miss Amber's house. She said she wanted to give you both some space, so you wouldn't feel awkward. I just assumed you already knew everything, sir. The name Amber, spoken so casually by our simple, unassuming housekeeper in the heart of our home, was more jarring than any accusation I could have ever screamed. It was a raw, unfiltered humiliation. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, the color draining from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. He couldn't believe that the affair he had so carefully concealed for 2 years was now laid bare so calmly, so matter-of-factly. His mouth opened, ready to deny, to roar, to threaten, but his throat seized up, strangling the words before they could form. From my laptop screen, I watched the horror dawn on his face, and I felt nothing. Not a single ripple of pity. For 7 years of my youth, I had loved that man with a fierce, naive devotion. I had waited up for him through countless lonely nights, cried myself to sleep over the strange lipstick stains on his collars, and then lied to myself, convincing myself they were just workplace accidents. But every woman has her breaking point. When neglect becomes a habit and betrayal becomes a character trait, love doesn't just fade, it dies a violent death, leaving only cold, hard calculation in its place. Ethan finally found his voice, stammering as he pointed a trembling finger at Maria. What nonsense are you talking about? Who told you to say that? Maria flinched, waving her hands defensively. Oh, no, sir, I swear. This is what Mrs. Sterling told me. She also said, you should feel free to do whatever you want in this house now, that she wasn't in charge anymore. Ethan didn't hear another word. He shoved past the terrified housekeeper and stormed up the stairs, his footsteps thundering on the polished hardwood, a sound of pure panic from a man realizing he had just lost control of something he always thought he owned. 7 days ago, I had moved every trace of myself out of that house, leaving him nothing but an empty shell. My disappearance wasn't an escape. It was the beginning of a cleansing. He thought I was a pampered housecat, declawed and content in my gilded cage. He forgot that even housecats have claws, and when they're cornered, they will shred the face of their tormentor. His footsteps pounded on the hardwood floor of the hallway, a frantic rhythm that echoed through the high-end surveillance system I was watching from miles away. He threw open the bedroom door with such force that it slammed against the wall, the crack of wood on plaster shattering the night's silence. The master suite, our sanctuary, lay before him, but it was no longer ours. It had been scrubbed of my essence, rendered as sterile and impersonal as a luxury hotel room after checkout. I watched as Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes darting around the room, desperately searching for any sign of me. But there was nothing left. The collection of expensive French perfumes on my vanity was gone. The walk-in closet, once overflowing with designer dresses and shoes, was now a cavernous, empty space. Even the faint, comforting scent of jasmine I used in our room had been replaced by the sharp, chemical odor of industrial-grade bleach. His gaze swept the room and finally landed on the polished oak vanity. There, under the soft glow of a single lamp, lay the only 2 items I had left behind: a crisp, white envelope and my 2-carat diamond wedding ring. The diamond, which once symbolized a lifetime of promises, now glinted with the cold, hard light of a broken vow. That ring, which he had placed on my finger 7 years ago in front of hundreds of guests, swearing to love and protect me forever, was now just a piece of evidence in the crime scene of our marriage. Ethan's hand trembled as he picked up the ring, its weight feeling alien in his palm. He snatched the document from the envelope. It wasn't a tear-stained letter. It was a formal, notarized divorce petition, my signature penned in firm, deliberate ink at the bottom. The anger on his face curdled into a new kind of panic. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. This was premeditated. This was war. He fumbled with his phone again, his face a mask of fury, but my number went straight to voicemail. He still believed this was just a dramatic, feminine ploy for attention, a childish tantrum after she'd discovered his affair. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, a far more terrifying thought seemed to strike him. It wasn't just about my disappearance. It was about what else I might have taken. He bolted from the bedroom, running to his private study across the hall. I watched him tear past the custom-built mahogany shelves to the large oil painting of a stormy sea. He ripped it from the wall, revealing the cold, steel face of a hidden safe. His fingers, usually so steady, shook as he punched in the code. The safe clicked open. He breathed a sigh of relief as his eyes fell upon the stacks of emergency cash and the heavy gold bars. They were all there. For a fleeting moment, his arrogance returned. She's just an emotional woman, he probably thought. She wouldn't know the first thing about what's really important. But his relief was short-lived. He reached deeper into the safe, into a hidden back compartment, and his hand met empty air. His blood ran cold. He frantically felt around, pulling everything out onto the floor. It was gone. The black leather ledger, the one he jokingly called his Bible of Sins, was missing. It was a meticulous, handwritten record of every bribe, every kickback, every illegal transaction he'd made over the past 3 years. And with it, the heavy, ornate corporate seal for Apex Holdings, the shell company I was the director of. The very tool he used to launder his dirty money had also vanished. He sat back on his heels, his face ashen. He finally understood. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a coup. And in that precise moment of dawning horror, his new burner phone, the one he thought I didn't know about, began to ring. It was an unknown number. He took a ragged breath, trying to compose himself, to reclaim his authority. "Hello?" A calm, measured male voice, cool and sharp as a scalpel, came through the speaker. "Mr. Sterling? My name is Marcus Davies. I am the legal representative for Mrs. Olivia Sterling. I'm calling to inform you that as of this afternoon, a petition for divorce has been filed with the state of New York." Ethan's voice was a low growl. "A lawyer? My wife hired a lawyer? Where is she? Put her on the phone right now. This childish game is over." A faint, almost imperceptible chuckle came from the other end. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of pity for a man who had no idea he was already standing on a trapdoor. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Sterling." "Mr. Davies continued, his tone unwavering. "Furthermore, given the evidence presented of financial misconduct and intent to conceal marital assets, the court has granted an emergency injunction. Effective immediately, all of your personal and business accounts have been frozen." "What?" Ethan roared, scrambling to his feet. "You can't do that. That's my money." "That will be for the court to decide," Davies said smoothly. "This includes the primary operating account for Sterling Enterprises, containing, I believe, a balance of just over $80 million. Have a good evening, Mr. Sterling." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone in disbelief before throwing it against the wall. He snatched his own iPhone from his pocket, his thumb swiping frantically to open his banking app. The familiar logo appeared, the loading wheel spinning for an agonizingly long moment. Then the main screen loaded. The balance was there, all $80 million of it, a number that had always filled him with a sense of godlike power. But now, splashed across the top of the screen in a stark, brutal red banner, were 2 words that sealed his fate: "Account frozen." Ethan's knees buckled. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the expensive rug. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands clutching his head, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. The $80 million might as well have been $1 billion. It was a fortune trapped behind impenetrable glass, a treasure he could see but never touch. He was financially paralyzed, stripped of his power not by a corporate rival, but by the quiet, unassuming wife he had underestimated until it was far, far too late. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows, mocking the darkness that had enveloped Ethan's world. He was a wreck. A night spent pacing, drinking, and staring at frozen bank accounts had left him looking like a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit was crumpled, his eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles, and a frantic energy pulsed beneath his skin. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. He had to find Olivia. He was convinced that if he could just get her in a room, look her in the eye, he could bully, charm, or threaten her back into submission. It had always worked before. He grabbed his shattered burner phone, miraculously still functioning, and dialed the one number connected to her past that he actually knew, her mother's. The phone rang for a long time, the cheerful, folksy ringtone grating on his frayed nerves. Finally, a warm, slightly frail voice answered. "Hello? It's Ethan," he said, his voice raspy. "Is Olivia there? Is she with you in Vermont?" There was a pause, then the sound of genuine confusion. "Ethan, dear? What a surprise!" "No, Livy isn't here. Is everything all right? I tried calling her yesterday, but her phone went to voicemail. I just figured you two were off on one of your fancy trips." Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing a strained politeness into his voice. He knew Olivia's mother was a simple, kind woman who wouldn't know how to lie. If Olivia wasn't there, she wasn't there. "No, everything's fine," he lied. "She just went out early and forgot her phone. I was just worried. I'll see you at Christmas." He hung up before she could ask another question, before his facade of control could crack. He tossed the phone onto the sofa and stared into space, a chilling realization washing over him. Where else could she be? He scrolled through the thousands of contacts in his phone, CEOs, lawyers, politicians, models, all the pawns and players in his high-stakes world. But as he searched, his stomach tightened into a knot. There wasn't a single entry for a friend of Olivia's. Not one. In 7 years of marriage, he had never bothered to learn the names of the women she had coffee with, the friends she confided in. He had actively discouraged her friendships, preferring her to be a beautiful, isolated satellite orbiting solely around him. He had engineered her loneliness to ensure his control, and now that very loneliness had become her impenetrable fortress. His frustration boiled over. He stormed back downstairs and found Maria nervously polishing an already gleaming silver tray. He cornered her in the pantry, his large frame blocking the exit. "Think, Maria," he said, his voice low and menacing. "In the days before she left, did anyone visit her? Did she receive any packages? Anything at all out of the ordinary?" Maria trembled, her eyes wide with fear. She wrung her hands, trying to dredge up a memory from the fog of her daily routine. "No, sir. Mrs. Sterling, she almost never has visitors. She just stays home, takes care of the house for you." "Don't lie to me!" Ethan slammed his hand against a shelf, rattling jars of imported olives. "If you're hiding something for her, I will throw you out on the street with nothing." Now think. The threat worked. Maria flinched as if struck. Her eyes darted back and forth as she frantically searched her memory. Then, a flicker of recognition. Yes, I remember now," she whispered. "About a week ago, a courier came. He delivered a package. A very thick one, wrapped in plain brown paper and taped up so tightly." She looked up at him. When Mrs. Sterling took it, her hands were shaking. She didn't open it in the living room. She took it straight to the study and locked the door. She stayed in there all afternoon. She didn't even come down for dinner. Ethan leaned in closer, his eyes boring into hers. "And then what? Did you hear anything?" Maria swallowed hard. "Later that night, I brought her some tea. The door was almost closed, but I heard her on the phone. Her voice, it was strange. It was happy, but also, like she was about to cry. I heard her say it very clearly. She said, 'I have it. I have all the proof I need. The time has come. The time has come.'" The words echoed in Ethan's skull like a death knell. This was no emotional breakdown. This was a long, calculated game of chess, and he had just realized he'd been in checkmate for months. The thought sent a new wave of ice through his veins. What else had she been doing right under his nose? He raced back to his study, a primal fear now overriding everything else. He powered on his laptop and navigated through layers of security to his offshore accounts, the slush funds he used for bribes, for Amber, for all the dirty little secrets that fueled his empire. The numbers on the screen were still impressive, but as he clicked through the transaction histories, a horrifying pattern emerged. For the last 2 years, Olivia had been bleeding him dry, one tiny drop at a time. A $5,000 wire transfer here. A $2,000 cash withdrawal from an ATM in a different state there. A $10,000 payment for online consulting services to a company he'd never heard of. Hundreds of small, insignificant transactions, all carefully calibrated to fly under the radar of the bank's fraud detection systems. It was like watching an army of ants patiently carrying away a feast, crumb by crumb. He did a quick, frantic calculation. The total was staggering. Nearly $2 million. He slumped back in his chair, a strangled laugh escaping his lips. She had been building her war chest with his own black money. The irony was a bitter poison. He had always seen her as a beautiful decoration, a status symbol who knew her place. But all along, while he was out playing the king, the quiet queen had been dismantling his entire kingdom from the inside out. He wasn't just dealing with a scorned wife. He was up against a brilliant, patient, and utterly ruthless adversary. Just as Ethan was reeling from the discovery of his pilfered slush funds, the sharp, insistent buzz of the penthouse intercom cut through the silence. Maria's nervous voice crackled over the speaker. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Amber is here. She says it's an emergency." Ethan's head snapped up. Amber, the last person on earth he wanted to see right now. Her presence felt like salt being poured into a fresh, gaping wound. "Tell her I'm busy. Tell her to go away." He barked into the receiver. But it was too late. Before Maria could relay the message, he heard a commotion and the sound of the front door being thrown open. Amber stormed into the living room, a tempest of blonde hair and feigned distress. Her designer dress was artfully rumpled, her mascara expertly smudged to create the perfect look of a distraught lover. She rushed towards him, her voice a high-pitched wail that grated on his already shattered nerves. "Ethan, darling. Oh, thank God I found you." She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. "I was so worried. Someone told me you were moving all your money to Switzerland, that you were going to leave me." The rumor, of course, was a fabrication I had carefully planted. A few days prior, I'd used an anonymous email to contact one of Amber's so-called frenemies, a gossip-hungry socialite, and spun a tale of Ethan's impending flight from the country. I knew Amber's greed and insecurity would do the rest. My prediction was flawless. Ethan, whose mind was a chaotic storm of frozen accounts and missing ledgers, pushed her away, his patience non-existent. "What are you talking about? Who told you that nonsense?" Amber's eyes filled with crocodile tears. She clutched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "It doesn't matter. Ethan, you can't leave me. Not now." She took a deep, dramatic breath, placing a hand over her perfectly flat stomach. "Ethan, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. It's a boy." The words hung in the air, a desperate, poorly executed gambit. 6 months ago, that news might have sent a thrill of victory through him, a son, an heir, something his actual wife had never given him. But now, in the smoldering ruins of his life, it sounded like a demand, a shakedown. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. I watched from my laptop, a cold, detached observer. I knew she wasn't pregnant. I had seen the receipts for her birth control pills, automatically renewed and paid for by that same black card. She thought a baby was her golden ticket, her insurance policy to secure a piece of the sterling fortune. She had no idea the fortune was already gone. She pressed her advantage, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You promised, Ethan. You promised you'd leave that old hag and marry me. Now that I'm carrying your son, you have to. Or you could just give me $10 million. I could go away, raise our son quietly, and never bother you again. A clean break, before you move to Europe. $10 million. The sheer audacity of it, at a time when he couldn't even access $10, was so absurd it was almost comical. A dry, ragged laugh escaped Ethan's lips. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full-blown, unhinged cackle. He was a king whose kingdom had just burned to the ground, and this jester was demanding a chest of gold from the ashes. He looked at the woman he had risked everything for, the woman he had once found so intoxicating, and for the first time, he saw her for what she truly was, a parasite. A beautiful, chattering, endlessly hungry parasite. His laughter died abruptly, replaced by a terrifying calm. "You came here, to my home, while I am in the middle of a crisis, and all you can think about is money?" The shift in his tone finally seemed to penetrate her self-absorbed drama. She took a step back, her eyes widening slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about our son." "There is no son," he roared, his voice cracking with rage. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes and knew he was right. In that moment of clarity, the contrast between the two women in his life hit him with the force of a physical blow. Olivia, who had spent 7 years quietly building his world, supporting his ambitions, and managing his life with silent efficiency. And Amber, who, at the first sign of trouble, was here with her hand out, ready to sell a fictional child for a payday. He felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years, a twisted, desperate defense of the wife he had so carelessly discarded. He had destroyed his marriage for this? This cheap, transparent, gold-digging fraud? Amber, sensing she was losing him, resorted to her crudest weapon. She sneered, her pretty face contorting into an ugly mask. "What? Are you suddenly feeling guilty about your barren old wife, the woman who couldn't even give you an heir? She's a dried-up, useless socialite, Ethan. I'm giving you a legacy." That was the final straw. The insult, so vile and so dismissive of the quiet pain I had endured for years, ignited the last of Ethan's self-control. He had never blamed me for our childlessness, mainly because doctors had hinted the issue was likely his. But he'd let me carry the social shame of it, another shield for his fragile ego. Hearing that shame weaponized by his mistress, in his home, broke something inside him. Crack. The sound was sharp and ugly. He moved faster than she could react, his hand striking her across the face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, a shocked cry escaping her lips. A red handprint bloomed on her cheek. She stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. The charming, powerful lover was gone, replaced by a cornered, violent animal. "Don't you ever," he seethed, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "speak her name again." He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "She is my wife. She belongs in this house. You are nothing. You were a toy I bought, and now I'm done playing. Get out. Get out of my house before I kill you." He grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. That was all it took. Amber scrambled to her feet, terror finally eclipsing her greed. She snatched her purse and fled, her sobs echoing in the hallway as she ran for her life. Ethan stood alone amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving. He stared at his own hand, the one that had just struck a woman, as if it belonged to a stranger. He had driven Amber away, but it wasn't out of a sudden resurgence of love for me. It was because, in that moment, he had a terrifying epiphany. He was more afraid of my silence than he was of her noise. My calculated, silent disappearance was a threat of a magnitude he was only just beginning to comprehend. He had cast out the architect of his life, and he was finally, truly, terrifyingly alone in the ruins. The adrenaline from his violent outburst drained away, leaving Ethan in a state of agitated exhaustion. The penthouse, once his sanctuary of power, now felt like a prison cell, its silence charged with unseen threats. He poured himself a whiskey, his hand still shaking, and his eyes roamed the vast, art-filled living room. He felt a creeping, chilling sensation, the paranoid feeling of being watched. His gaze fell upon the large oil painting hanging over the fireplace, the one of the stormy sea, the one that concealed his safe. Except it wasn't that painting. It was a different one, a vibrant, abstract canvas of blues and golds that I had bought for him on our 3rd anniversary. He'd barely glanced at it at the time, dismissing it as frivolous. But now, in the dim light, he saw something he'd never noticed before. Tucked away in a swirl of thick, textured paint, a tiny red light blinked, faint but steady. Blink. Pause. Blink. He froze, the whiskey glass halfway to his lips. He set it down with a clatter and walked slowly towards the painting, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He reached out and touched the canvas, his fingers tracing the hardened ridges of paint until they found it. A small, hard, unnatural bump. He dug at it with his fingernail, and a tiny, black object, no bigger than a ladybug, fell into his palm. It was a pinhole camera, the kind used by spies and private investigators. A wave of nausea and cold dread washed over him. He staggered back, his eyes darting around the room, seeing it now not as a home, but as a stage. If there was one here, where else? He tore through the room like a madman, yanking books from shelves, pulling cushions off sofas, inspecting every vase and lamp. He found another one, cleverly hidden inside the speaker grill of the Bang & Olufsen sound system. A third was tucked into the digital alarm clock on his bedside table. The full, horrifying truth crashed down upon him. I hadn't just been watching his finances, I had been watching him. For how long? The painting had been there for 4 years. 4 years of his life, his secrets, his betrayals, all of it captured, recorded, and archived. His clandestine phone calls, his late-night arguments with business rivals, the countless times he'd brought Amber back to their marital bed. All of it. He was the star of a 4-year-long reality show, and he had never even known the cameras were rolling. As he stood in the center of the room, a man stripped bare of all his secrets, the landline on his desk began to ring, its shrill, old-fashioned peal cutting through the silence like an alarm. He stared at it, a new kind of fear gripping him. It was the private line, the one reserved for a single caller. His mother. He snatched up the receiver, his voice hoarse. "Hello? Ethan." The voice on the other end was pure ice. Catherine Sterling, the matriarch of the family, a woman who wielded power with the effortless grace of a monarch, did not waste time with pleasantries. "Be at the estate in Connecticut in 1 hour. Come alone." The line went dead before he could even reply. He drove like a man possessed, the sleek lines of his Aston Martin eating up the miles on the Merritt Parkway. But he felt no thrill, only a sense of impending doom. He knew this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a summons. An execution. The Sterling family estate was a sprawling, stone behemoth, a monument to old money and untouchable power. He was met at the door not by a butler, but by his mother's grim-faced lawyer. He was led into the grand library, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books that had never been read. Catherine Sterling sat behind a massive partner's desk, her posture ramrod straight, her silver hair styled in an impeccable chignon. She didn't look at him. She simply gestured to the leather armchair opposite her. Ethan sat, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Mother," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "there's been a misunderstanding. Olivia has." "I know what Olivia has done," Catherine cut him off, her voice dangerously quiet. "She was kind enough to inform me herself." She slid a small digital audio recorder across the polished surface of the desk. "I believe you should hear this." She pressed play. And my voice filled the room. Not angry, not hysterical, but calm, measured, and heartbreakingly sad. It was a recording I had sent to her that morning, a final, strategic appeal to the one person whose opinion mattered more to Ethan than anyone's. "Catherine," my recorded voice began, addressing her with a respect I had always shown. "By the time you hear this, I will no longer be your daughter-in-law. For 7 years, I tried to be the wife your son deserved, the woman worthy of the Sterling name. I know you often worried about my back pain, especially when the weather turned damp. I left a specially prepared arnica and ginger rub in your medicine cabinet. It should last you through the winter. And the chamomile tea you enjoy, the one with the hand-picked lavender, there's a fresh tin in the pantry. It will help you sleep." Ethan stared at his mother, his face a mixture of confusion and shame. He had never known I did those things. He'd assumed the staff took care of his mother's comforts. My voice on the recording continued, a slight tremor entering it for the first time. "I am not doing this for money, Catherine. I am doing it to reclaim the years I lost, and to give your son the freedom to be with the woman he truly loves. My only regret is the shame this will bring to the family name. For that, I am truly sorry. Please, take care of yourself." The recording ended. Catherine Sterling let out a long, slow breath, a rare crack in her iron facade. She picked up her teacup, took a sip, and set it down with a sharp click. When she finally looked at Ethan, her eyes were devoid of any maternal warmth. They were the eyes of a CEO, assessing a catastrophic liability. "She is a class act, Ethan," Catherine said, her voice dripping with disappointed fury. "A woman of substance and grace, and you, in your infinite stupidity, traded her for a common little tramp." She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the manicured lawns. "Your sordid affair, your financial recklessness. I can forgive a man his appetites, but I cannot forgive incompetence. You didn't just get caught, Ethan. You allowed yourself to be systematically dismantled by a woman you saw as nothing more than a decoration. You let her get the codes, the seal, the ledger. You handed her the gun and then looked surprised when she pulled the trigger." She turned back to face him, her expression hardening into stone. "The family will not be dragged down with you. As of this moment, all financial support from the Sterling Trust is cut off. Your company is on its own. Settle this mess with Olivia, and do it quietly. If this scandal touches the stock price of the main corporation, if you tarnish the Sterling name any further, I will personally see to it that you are removed from your position, stripped of your inheritance, and cast out. Do you understand me? You are on your own." I probably done. The words were a death sentence. He had been excommunicated, thrown to the wolves by his own mother to protect the pack. Ethan stumbled out of the library, the weight of his mother's edict crushing him. He had lost his wife, his money, and now his family. He was utterly and completely alone. Driving away from the cold stone walls of the family estate, Ethan felt a profound and terrifying sense of freefall. The safety nets had all been cut. His mother's ultimatum echoed in his mind, not as a warning, but as a final judgment. He was no longer a Sterling. He was a liability. The calculated rejection from the one person he thought would always be his backstop pushed him over the edge, from desperation into a dark and dangerous new territory. He pulled his car over onto the shoulder of the deserted country road, the headlights cutting a lonely path through the encroaching twilight. The polished civility of his world had failed him. Threats, money, family influence, all his usual weapons were useless. When the rules of the game no longer work, he thought, you have to change the game. His hand trembled as he scrolled through the contacts on his burner phone, past the numbers of CEOs and socialites, to a name he had saved under a simple, discreet heading. Cleaner. It was the number for Rocco, the fixer, Moretti, a man who operated in the deep, murky shadows of the city's underbelly, a man who solved problems that couldn't be solved with a lawsuit or a payoff. Ethan had used him once before, years ago, to make a pesky journalist's evidence disappear. Now, he needed him to make a person disappear. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of expensive leather and his own cold sweat filling the car. He pressed the call button. A gravelly, impatient voice answered on the second ring. Yeah? Ethan tried to keep his own voice steady, to project an authority he no longer felt. Rocco, it's Sterling. I have a job for you, a sensitive one. Price is no object. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Sterling, long time. What's the problem? Someone needs a lesson, or someone needs to go on a long vacation. Ethan's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. He glanced around the empty road as if assassins were hiding in the trees. The words felt like acid in his mouth, but he forced them out, cold and clear. I need you to find a woman, my wife. She's hiding somewhere in the city. I need you to find her, get a laptop and a black leather ledger from her. And if she resists, he hesitated, the finality of the act hanging heavy in the air. Make sure she can't talk to anyone, ever again. I want her gone, Rocco. Wiped off the map. Clean. The line was silent for a moment, the unspoken implications settling between them. That's a different price list, Mr. Sterling, Rocco said, his voice now stripped of any humor. A much different list. I'll pay it, Ethan said, his voice a desperate rasp. Whatever it takes, just get it done. He ended the call, his body slick with sweat. He had just crossed a line from which there was no return. He was no longer just a cheating husband or a crooked businessman. He was a man willing to commit murder to save himself. The next morning, armed with the grim knowledge that a contract was now out on my life, Ethan attempted one last, desperate power play. He bypassed security and stormed into the sleek, downtown offices of my lawyer, Marcus Davies. He was done with phone calls. He would confront this man face to face, break him, and find out where I was. In his world, everyone had a price or a breaking point. Davies was seated at his desk, reviewing a file. He looked up as Ethan burst in, his expression not of surprise or fear, but of calm, weary expectation. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Sterling, I was wondering when you'd pay me a visit. Please, sit." The lawyer's composure was infuriating. Ethan slammed his hands on the polished desk, leaning in close, his face contorted with rage. "Cut the crap, Davies. Where is she? Tell me where you're hiding my wife, or I swear I will burn this entire firm to the ground with you in it." Davies didn't even flinch. He slowly removed his glasses, polished them with a silk cloth, and met Ethan's furious gaze with one of cool, intellectual superiority. "Threats, Mr. Sterling? Here? In a room that is, for the record, equipped with high-definition audio and video recording? That's not a very smart move for a man in your position." Ethan froze, the words dying in his throat. Davies continued, his voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. "As for your wife, she is in a very safe, very secure location, and to ensure she stays that way, we've taken certain precautions." He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "You see, we anticipated you might resort to less civilized methods to resolve this dispute. That's why we've implemented what you might call a dead man's switch." He let the term hang in the air. The entire cache of evidence, the black ledger, the corporate seal, every single video file from the 4 years of surveillance, every incriminating audio recording has been copied, encrypted, and uploaded to a series of secure, offshore servers. If anything happens to me, if I get a flat tire, a bad case of food poisoning, or, God forbid, something more permanent, or if Mrs. Sterling fails to enter a security code every 12 hours, that entire package is automatically and irrevocably sent to a preset list of recipients. He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. That list includes the lead white-collar crime reporter at the New York Times, the head of the SEC's Enforcement Division, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "Checkmate, Mr. Sterling." Ethan stared at him, his face draining of all color. He felt a profound, bottomless sense of defeat. Every move he made, every dark path he took, I had already anticipated it. I had built a fortress of evidence around myself, and now I had laid a minefield at his feet. He couldn't threaten me. He couldn't harm me. He couldn't even touch me without triggering his own nuclear annihilation. He was trapped, utterly and completely, in a prison of his own construction, with the woman he had wronged holding the only key. He stumbled backward, his legs feeling weak, and fled the office, not in anger, but in sheer, unadulterated terror. Beaten and checkmated by my lawyer, Ethan stumbled back to his car, a man running out of options. His last-ditch effort at intimidation had backfired spectacularly, leaving him more exposed than ever. The walls were closing in, but there was one final, desperate hope left on the table: the Vancorp merger. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal, the culmination of 2 years of aggressive negotiations. If he could just sign that contract, he'd have a massive infusion of capital. It wouldn't solve his legal problems, but it would give him the resources to fight, to hire the best lawyers money could buy, to perhaps escape the country with a fortune. It was his Hail Mary pass, his one shot at survival. He returned to the empty penthouse and transformed himself. He showered, shaved, and put on his most impeccable Armani suit, his armor for the corporate battlefield. He stood before the mirror, practicing his confident smile, forcing the terror from his eyes. "You are Ethan Sterling," he told himself, his reflection a pale, haunted version of the man he once was. "You do not lose." He put on his Patek Philippe watch, the familiar weight on his wrist a small comfort, a reminder of the power he once wielded so effortlessly. Then, he drove to the Sterling Enterprises headquarters for the most important meeting of his life. The main boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the glittering Manhattan skyline. Ethan entered with a practiced air of calm authority, shaking hands with Arthur Vance, the silver-haired, shrewd CEO of Vancorp, and the assembled board members. There was a subtle tension in the room. Whispers of Ethan's marital troubles and rumored financial instability had surely made the rounds. But in their world, a signed contract was the only truth that mattered. Ethan launched into his final presentation, his voice smooth and persuasive. He spoke of synergy, of market domination, of a future so bright and profitable it was almost blinding. He painted a masterpiece of corporate rhetoric, skillfully glossing over the gaping holes in his own company's foundation. He could feel the tide turning. The board members were nodding. Arthur Vance himself seemed impressed. The contracts, bound in rich blue leather, were placed in the center of the table. Victory was inches away. But just as Ethan picked up the gold-plated fountain pen to sign his name, the boardroom doors swung open. His executive assistant rushed in, her face pale with panic, forgetting all protocol. She clutched a stack of thick, yellow courier envelopes to her chest. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she stammered, her voice trembling. "But these were just delivered. For you and for Mr. Vance and all the board members." The courier said it was a matter of extreme legal urgency regarding the merger. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pierced Ethan's heart. He snatched the envelope with his name on it. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside wasn't a legal document. It was a professionally bound report. The title, printed in bold, stark letters, read, "Due Diligence Report. A comprehensive analysis of financial malfeasance and ethical breaches within Sterling Enterprises." He flipped through the pages. It was all there, scanned copies of pages from his black ledger, detailing bribes paid to city officials, transcripts of his recorded phone calls negotiating kickbacks, high-resolution photographs of him and Amber on their business trip to the Keys, time-stamped and cross-referenced with company expense reports. It was a perfect, methodical execution, but I wasn't finished. At that exact moment, a synchronized chime went off as every single person in the room received a new email. The subject line was simple and devastating: "The real Sterling Enterprises." Arthur Vance opened the email on his tablet. The room fell silent as they all watched a highlight reel of Ethan's greatest sins, video clips of him in bed with Amber, audio of him ordering Rocco to make me disappear, and the final nail in his corporate coffin, a direct link to the court order, in all its legal glory, confirming that his entire $80 million empire was frozen solid. The air in the room turned to ice. Ethan looked up from the damning report into a sea of horrified, disgusted faces. He saw not just the death of a deal, but the death of his entire identity. He tried to speak, to lie, to salvage something from the wreckage. "Arthur, this is a smear campaign." A competitor. Arthur Vance slowly took off his reading glasses and placed them on the table. He looked at Ethan not with anger, but with the profound contempt a master chess player has for a foolish, defeated opponent. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice flat and final, "in our business, trust is the only real currency, and it appears you are bankrupt." He stood up, signaling for his team to pack their briefcases. "This merger is off. We're done here." He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, the rest of his board trailing behind him like a funeral procession. Ethan stood alone in the silent boardroom, the unsigned contract lying on the table like a tombstone. He was ruined. And then, his assistant's tablet, left on the table in her haste, lit up with a breaking news alert. He glanced at the screen. It was a live broadcast from the nation's top financial news show, Market Movers, and the face on the screen was mine. I was introduced not as Olivia Sterling, the scorned wife, but as Cassandra, a brilliant but anonymous financial analyst who had been making waves with her uncannily accurate market predictions. I looked poised, powerful, and completely in control. The host turned to me. "Cassandra, welcome. You've brought us a fascinating case study tonight on corporate governance and the hidden risks of a CEO's moral failings." Actually, Speed. I smiled calmly into the camera, a smile that was broadcast into every trading room and boardroom in the country. "Thank you. Yes, tonight I want to dissect a hypothetical company, Let's call it Company S. It's a case study in how a foundation of personal deceit can lead to a catastrophic corporate collapse. It's the déblazé. And then, before a live, national audience, I began to dismantle my husband's life, piece by damning piece, using his own crimes as my data points, all under the guise of an expert financial analysis. He wasn't just losing his company, I was erasing his legacy. The live broadcast was a tactical nuke detonated in the heart of the financial world. As I calmly laid out the hypothetical case of Company S, every trader, analyst, and investor watching knew exactly who I was talking about. I didn't need to name names. The evidence I presented on screen, anonymized but unmistakable charts of laundered money, timelines of insider trading, did it for me. Before the show's closing credits even rolled, the market had passed its verdict. The next morning, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange sounded like a starting pistol for a massacre. Sterling Enterprises stock, ticker symbol SEI, opened not just down, but in a complete, terrifying freefall. A tidal wave of sell orders crashed the system. The price plummeted past every support level, blowing through the circuit breakers designed to halt such a catastrophic slide. It went from a respectable blue chip to a penny stock in the space of 90 minutes. The color on the trading floor wasn't just red, it was the dead, flat blue of a stock with zero buyers, a financial corpse. Ethan, holed up in his office, watched the carnage unfold on his screen. The numbers, once a source of immense pride, were now a torrent of red ink washing away his life's work. His phones rang off the hook, furious shareholders, panicked lenders, the SEC, but he didn't answer. He was paralyzed, a captain watching his ship sink into the abyss. The final blow came not from the market, but from his own family. A curt, formal email arrived from the Sterling board. He was fired, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and actions detrimental to the brand. The attached press release was already circulating, a cold, corporate statement disavowing him, casting him out to save the family's larger empire. When he finally tried to flee the building, a scene of pure chaos awaited him in the lobby. A horde of reporters, photographers, and angry investors, people who had lost their life savings on his stock, swarmed him the moment he stepped out of the elevator. Microphones were shoved in his face, camera flashes blinded him, and the furious shouts of betrayed stockholders rained down on him. "Thief! Liar! Give us our money back!" He was jostled, spat on, and his suit was torn before building security could drag him back into the elevator, a fallen king besieged by his former subjects. He was trapped in his glass tower, a prisoner of the ruin he had created. 6 months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. The spectacular collapse of Sterling Enterprises became a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. After a lengthy investigation, Ethan, stripped of his assets to pay a mountain of fines and settlements, narrowly avoided prison time, his mother's lawyers securing a plea deal that left him broke but free. The autumn air was crisp and cool as I walked through the bustling international terminal at JFK. I pulled a sleek silver carry-on behind me, my reflection in the polished floors showing a woman I barely recognized from a year ago. The hesitant, accommodating Olivia was gone, replaced by a woman who walked with purpose. My new investment fund, built on the reputation I had forged as Cassandra, had just secured a major deal in Singapore. My life was my own, filled with challenges I chose and successes I earned. As I neared the security checkpoint, a commotion up ahead caught my attention. A passenger, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, was loudly berating a janitor who had accidentally splashed some dirty water on his designer shoes. The janitor, a gaunt figure in a faded blue uniform, was hunched over, apologizing profusely, his voice muffled and hoarse. "I'm so sorry, sir. So sorry. My mistake." That voice. It was thin, broken, but it struck a chord deep in my memory. I stopped, my heart giving a single, strange jolt. I looked closer, past the ill-fitting uniform and the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. The janitor looked up for a moment, and under the brim of his cap, I saw his eyes, sunken, haunted, and utterly defeated. It was Ethan. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and graced the covers of magazines was now on his knees, wiping grime off a stranger's shoes for a living. The universe, it seemed, had a brutal sense of irony. Our eyes met across the crowded terminal. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop. I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes, followed by a wave of raw, burning shame. He quickly looked away, pulling his cap down further, trying to disappear into the anonymity of his new life. He started to turn, to flee from the ghost of the life he had destroyed. But then he stopped. He stood up slowly, his shoulders trembling. He looked back at me, a man completely undone, stripped of his pride, his power, everything. It was all there in his eyes. The regret, the apology he could never voice, the full crushing weight of his downfall. I stood there, looking at this stranger who was once the center of my world. I felt no anger, no pity, no satisfaction. I felt nothing. He was simply a chapter that had ended, a part of a story that was over. I gave him a single, small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was a dismissal, a final acknowledgement of a past that no longer had any power over me. Then, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked towards the security gate, towards my flight, towards the bright, limitless future that was waiting for me. The story of Ethan and Olivia Sterling was finished. But my story, the story of Cassandra, was just beginning.